Hi students, welcome to this e-lecture. In this session, we will be discussing why the Germans hated the Treaty of Versailles so much. In previous classroom sessions, we have looked at the terms of the treaty as well as Germans' reaction to it. Just to do a quick recap, I would like to show you further sources of Germany's reactions to the treaty. This is a German cartoon depicting the Allies as devils, forcing Germany to sign the Treaty of Versailles. And lastly, this is a German postcard produced in 1919. It shows a map with the areas in red, showing the territories that Germany lost as a result of the treaty. This is the Polish corridor, which effectively split Germany into two parts. More importantly is the poem under the map, which reads, "You must carve in your heart these words as in stone. What we have lost will be regained." So, it is important to note that not only were the Germans angry with the treaty, they were determined to take revenge one day for the injustice they felt they had suffered under the treaty. Why did the Germans felt that the treaty was unfair? More importantly, were they reasonable to think that the treaty was unfair? In this e-lecture, we shall look at the terms of the treaty one by one, how the Germans saw it, and also briefly discuss whether the Germans are reasonable to think this way. As we go through the terms, please make sure you fill in the blanks in the accompanying notes. One reason why the Germans resented the treaty was the fact that it was a dictated peace. During the negotiations at the Paris Peace Conference, the Germans were not allowed into the discussion at all. They were simply presented with the final terms of the treaty and told to sign. Any German criticism of the treaty were ignored. Therefore, the Germans described the treaty as a diktat, meaning it was a dictated peace and the terms were simply imposed upon them, whether they like it or not. Do you think the Germans were reasonable to think that the treaty was a dictated peace and therefore unfair? Well, yes, in a way. It was true that the German delegates at the Paris Peace Conference were shut out of discussions. If the Allies had taken into account of German criticism, the actual treaty might not have been so harsh on them. More importantly, the fact that the treaty was a diktat enabled Hitler to use it as an excuse that the treaty was forced upon Germany, and hence they had no obligation to honor it. This led Germany to ignore the terms of the treaty and ultimately led to the outbreak of World War II. However, on the flip side, some historians have also argued that the Germans had no right to complain that the treaty was a diktat. Why so? If you remember, in 1917, Russia withdrew from World War I. It signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. In the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, Germany also imposed peace terms on the Russians and took away huge tracts of land away from the Russians. Therefore, the Germans should not expect better treatment after the harsh way they treated the Russians in World War I. Secondly, the Germans were also angry with the loss of territories. In the treaty, they lost Alsace-Lorraine. The Polish corridor was created, which split Germany. Germans who lived on this corridor found themselves being ruled by a foreign government. Austria, which was a German-speaking country, was forbidden to unite with Germany. Germany's colonies were also taken away to be run by the Allies under the League of Nations. The Germans complained that this was unfair. Were they right with these complaints? Well, yes, in a way. By taking away these territories, it was very difficult for Germany to pay reparations. Many of these territories were rich in raw materials, and for example, the charcoal fields would have helped Germany generate revenue or money to help pay for the reparations. In addition, President Wilson had championed the right of self-determination, which is the right of countries to rule themselves and not be subjected to foreign rule. However, the Germans felt that this principle of self-determination did not seem to apply to them, as Germans living on the Polish corridor found themselves ruled by the foreign Polish government. Moreover, with the German colonies taken away from them, it meant that the Allies would profit from these colonies instead. Thus, the Germans' argument that the treaty was unfair could be accepted in this respect. Next, the Germans were also angry with the disarmament clause. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany's army was limited to only 100,000 men. Its weapons were also heavily limited. The Germans were unhappy as they argued that 100,000 troops were insufficient for Germany to maintain law and order immediately after the war. Were the Germans right to be unhappy with this? Well, yes and no. Yes, because President Wilson had emphasized the need for all European countries to disarm or reduce their weapons after World War I. But it seemed that only Germany was forced to disarm. Other Allied powers did not have to disarm to the level that Germany experienced. Therefore, the Germans felt they had been treated unfairly. On the other hand, the Germans had no right to be unhappy, and the French desire for a weak Germany was understandable. After all, it had been attacked twice by Germany, and it was only reasonable that France demanded Germany's military to be kept as weak as possible. Another term of the treaty that angered the Germans was the War Guilt Clause, or Clause 231. Germany had to accept full responsibility for causing the war. Were they right to be angry? Well, yes. If you recall, World War I was the result of a variety of reasons, and many countries, not just Germany alone, was responsible. The Allies had imposed Clause 231 on Germany as they wanted Germany to pay reparations for World War I. Therefore, it was understandable and perhaps justified that the Germans felt that the treaty was unfair. Lastly, the reparations made the Germans very angry as well. Germany was made to pay £6,600 million in reparations, and the Germans felt humiliated. They protested that it was impossible for Germany to pay. Were they right to be angry? Yes. By taking away important territories such as Rhineland and the charcoal fields, Germany would be unable to rebuild its own economy, and with a collapsed economy, Germany would be unable to pay reparations. So I have presented both perspectives. One is that the Germans were reasonable to be angry, and the other is that Germans were not justified to be angry with the treaty. So, what is your view? Do you think Germany is right to be angry? To help you in thinking about this, I would like to leave you with two quotes. The first is an African proverb. Until lions have their own historians, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunters. And another, by a British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, says, history is written by the victors. Think about what these two quotes think. are talking about and come up with your own perspective. Thank you for listening to this e-lecture, and make sure you complete the accompanying notes.